Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, we have the one and only John McClymont. He's a principal supply chain operations transformation over at Operational Innovations. He's a consultant doing very interesting things out there, but also putting out great content on LinkedIn almost every single day. I think I see something pop up from him. So really interesting in the space and have some really interesting thoughts and ideas on why things work and why things don't work as well, which I think is some of the most interesting takes he has. So looking forward to talking to him here today about all things warehousing, fulfillment, and distribution. So John, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I am super good, man. Thank you for having me, and totally love the show and everything that you've been doing. Just watching everything you've been getting into the last few years. So really, really cool to be on and to help support and to just chat and see what's new in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to get you on and have, been watching you too. So definitely mutual feelings there as well. So I guess let's kick it off here, and maybe for people that don't know you or not familiar with you, tell us just like a little bit about your background and, kind of what you do now.
Yeah, for sure. I've been doing logistics, operations, supply chain for the last 20 years. I usually like to tell people that I started when I had hair, but not true. I'm one of the exceptions where I didn't necessarily lose my hair from the
Yeah.
wonderful world of logistics. But I started as a frontline supervisor in the food industry, sort of managing delivery, day-to-day ops, everything from smaller straight trucks right up to tractor trailers, so doing school deliveries, doing major retail deliveries, doing all kinds of stuff like that. So really kind of in an organization where it was a fast moving consumer good. Food for the most part is just wild. Like the business behind food, everyone goes to the store, they think it's no big deal, but it's a machine that never stops moving to make sure that, those things are always on the shelf. And it's really big business. So frontline supervisor, 5 years, kind of work my way up over the next, let's call it 10, up to a national director where I was doing, major work and major projects and optimization effort with, some of the biggest retailers that you see out there today. Super fortunate to have been given lots of opportunities to get into a lot of different ways to make things better. Like everything, every organization is always looking to improve, tighten up, kind of execute stronger. And that's really where I developed my, let's call it passion or real interest and alignment with like continuous improvement and doing things differently than, just your status quo. After more than a dozen years in the food industry, I went into the cash industry, which I thought was really cool, right? Now all of
Yeah.
a sudden you're going from
Interesting.
moving food to cash, which is another big business behind something that that you really don't think about. Got to design and build a new type of armored car. Managed a bunch of the sort of activity around those, which really kind of amped up when you're talking about like things like chain of custody, like precision, really understanding what's happening, because you can imagine people crossing the street with hundreds of thousands of dollars in their hand every day.
Yeah.
You don't just get to be like, oops isn't really an answer. So
You can't lose
so
that package. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Talk about like what's one of the delivered not received, right? Like they like to talk about in e-commerce, just not allowed. Not allowed.
Yeah.
So that had a lot of influence too on my my perception when it comes to like what what your expectations are, what you can really do when it comes to chain of custody. And then, after that, I've been doing now for the last few years, independent consulting. I'll agree with you only because it's easier for people to understand. But I honestly dislike the term consultant. I think, unfortunately,
Okay.
the big firms have given it like a bad rap. And I think a lot of other people, in the same way that you see a lot of, one company, sort of one person like CEO activity in the e-com space and in the operation space. You get a lot of that with consulting. So I think a lot of people, unfortunately, have had what I would say are negative experiences with it, just from people jumping in and saying, hey, I did X, Y, and Z responsibilities at some company in the past, but now I'm going to do them really great for everyone else. I think being a really great operator is hard. And I think that being able to shift it from business to business is hard too, because for as much as the tech industry would like you to believe that everything just needs an app, the reality is operations is very personal to each person's business, and what works for one person as a playbook and could even work exceptionally well doesn't necessarily work for everyone else. So these days I help anyone from startups, small businesses, all the way up to major retail or major service providers on the logistics side do more and do things better and do them in a way that maybe they didn't think they could, or the way that they need to adapt to the market.
Yeah, and I think it's really, really interesting there, dealing with, two critical things, right, in your career. You got the food, right, which we all need, and then the cash, which we all need too, right, and we all want more, of course, right.
I can tell you, man, after being in the food industry, and I was doing like refrigerated, frozen, like sort of like the full array. I've never found anything remotely as hard, not because of the fact that other things don't have complexity, but like, I mean, you lose a trailer load because it was parked wrong in the yard and hot air was getting in there, or it froze, or thawed if it was frozen or something like that. And, just the sensitivity of it. Like when you make a product from manufacturing, so from the best possible case to the time that's expired is like 20 days. You're living in a very different like life cycle and speed of your activity, right? So when people are like, oh my god, I can have 6 months of inventory. I mean, the biggest plant when I was in that would turn over their core SKUs 4 times a day.
Wow. Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
so, I that's why I kind of joke around sometimes that, it was probably, trial by fire without really realizing it, since it was, my first real job coming out of university and school and all of that. So super thankful for it. Probably didn't appreciate or understand the differences as much. I'm curious if I knew, if I would have gotten as much out of it, because without knowing, you kind of jump into everything and get involved with everything.
Yeah. You're just kind of curious, and you just sort of figured out.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'll do that. Sure. Yeah. but now you know.
Pretty much.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting there, and interesting too. You mentioned this kind of point where you got into and started to develop this passion for continuous improvement. So I'm curious, like, what was the shift in your mind there, or what kind of opened up that like third eye for continuous improvement?
I'd love to just say, oh, there was this really like magical and like sweetheart moment that like just makes people feel it. I think, to be honest with you, and I've written about this before, in a past life when I would do more personal type writing that you can still find on the internet, but is not on LinkedIn. Is It probably wasn't honestly for all of the right reasons. You know what I mean? Like, if I look back at myself as I've matured and aged over the years, and you look at it, I do think that there was a lot of like sort of like, ego and that desire to prove yourself and to to be good and climb the corporate ladder and do all of those things. So it's an interesting dichotomy, because the thing is that probably less than ideal motivation led to a lot of opportunities, a lot of learning, a lot of like development, that, obviously serves me super well today. And, having a different motivation now and things behind it, and really understanding the benefits that it gives. But, you tie that in with the fact that I think I'm overly curious naturally. Like I rarely accept someone just being like, oh, you can't understand that, this is too hard, too complicated, too this, too that. Like if I had one idea, and someone asked me this one time in an interview years and years ago, and what's the most foundational sort of idea or thing that you've learned in your life? And it really is this concept that things are much simpler than we like to make them out to be. That's not to say that they're hard or that it doesn't take a lot more, but when you really chunk things down, to be cliche, like, cut the elephant into bite-sized bits, it's not always as challenging as people make it out to be. So, that natural sort of curiosity, and then you tie it in with the fact of like, oh, that this problem is too hard to solve, and you're kind of like, hold my beer type thinking, right? You just go do it. So
Yeah, I love that, and I think that's a great way to put it. Definitely, I think it's kind of when you say it's simpler than people may make it out to be, but I think we kind of often put these little mental barriers in a sense, right? To just make it seem like it's more complicated, right? But if you just go and try and like you said, we'll trial by fire and kind of try to figure it out, like you kind of unlock probably a whole new way of thinking or doing certain type of thing. So really interesting there. So now let's talk a little bit about the industry itself, right? I know you got opinions. I see them on LinkedIn. So let's talk.
yeah, time to time. Yeah.
Let's talk about specifically. Let's talk about kind of the e-commerce fulfillment space, whether it's from brand perspective or 3PL perspective. What are you kind of seeing in the market right now? What is your kind of take and thoughts on that part of the industry?
Yeah, well, like, talk about like a super loaded question, like huge question. Like, what do you think's going on? I mean, ecom is interesting, and I think realistically, it's a bit of a different world. Some things are similar, but it's really like a different world from like a brand and a product side, let's call it, versus like a service provider side. For brands, I think it's for everyone. I think it's getting much harder. For brands, though, especially, like I think that e-com in particular is going through a really strange phase right now because if you think of the growth of e-commerce, really supported by and propelled by this, all of a sudden opportunity for optionality, right? Like, as more and more people got exposed to, online stores, product from all over the world, it's like you kind of fell away from being like, ooh, I can't buy these certain types of things, or I wish there were these types of things. Like, all of these things kind of existed in different ways. And as e-commerce matured, they became essentially accessible, right? I remember the first time I ordered a bag, and I think I've shared this before on LinkedIn, but I like huge bag head, like, backpacks, things like that, and ordered it from New Zealand, like the company's in New Zealand. And no word of a lie, like, it was expensive at the time, but shipping it showed up from New Zealand to my door in Canada in 3 days.
Wow.
With DHL. And that was just like wild when you're like, hey, here's a product I can't buy anywhere, I can't get anywhere, and literally shipped from the other side of the planet, and it went from door to door in 3 days. So I think e-commerce originally grew, so much because of that, because now, like, the shackles were off and you could get stuff everywhere. Now, though, on that product side, I think what's happening is that there's too many options. Like, now everyone knows that you can get everything. And, it went from being like, hey, you used online to buy these really experiential, these really great products from different brands and different places all over the world, to like, I could go on Amazon today and buy a pen. And I mean, like a commodity pen. And they're
Yeah.
like, yeah, we'll ship it to you. Do you want it for free?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? It's, so I think that there's a lot of challenge there as now all of a sudden, like, the fact that you can sell is no longer the draw. And now you have to focus so much more on like, how do I really connect with my customer, and why are they going to pick me? Because they can choose from so many other people. On the service provider side, I think that that's been equally the sort of the rise, and I'll call it fall, or the sort of like the opportunity and the challenge, because it's like, when people were shipping from everywhere, people were more willing to pay because these costs were getting passed on, because people were buying these experiential products, and like, I can't get this anywhere else. What do I care if there's $25 shipping on it, so to speak? These days, though, as everyone is trying to sell more, offer more, use price, especially as a big value driver, that puts a ton of pressure now on service providers to be able to do the work for lower and lower costs, which I definitely have strong opinions about that race to the bottom. And then on top of it, there's just not as much margin as the orders are like increasing, right? Like the overall quantity of orders, the average order value is actually falling, which means that I have less and less margin or space in that transaction to pay those higher shipping prices. So I keep looking for more ways to get things done cheaper in a different way, this and that. So you tie that on with the fact that, like, companies like Amazon, for example, have just set these expectations that are really wild
Yeah.
in the sense of like what they do. It's just created a really challenging time for both brands and service providers to meet consumer expectations in a way that is actually sustainable for a business. Because I mean, no one is in it to essentially fund it from VC funding, fund it from loans, fund it from wherever else. Like the business has to make money, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really interesting point that you have there, kind of the evolution where, it was like, oh, we can do this, and now we can get access as consumers to like lots of different products from all over the world that, maybe we didn't have access before, but now it's just so normal to just get anything, right? Whether it's special or not, like you said, like just a regular pen off of Amazon, right? So very interesting there. And I'm curious, you touched on kind of the experience, right? And how that's a little bit of a differentiator. And actually, I was talking a lot about this in my talk at the fulfillment forum last week. So I'm curious from your perspective, right? How can these e-commerce, whether they're in retail or not, right? If they're digital, like just a D2C kind of native brand, I mean, what are you seeing that is really impactful for the experience for the consumer, and kind of helping them to win more business and be able to drive like that consumer loyalty a little more?
So, I think the biggest thing is to be able to do what you say, which
Mm.
sounds super easy, but I mean, having the right type of communication, having the right type of follow-ups, and also making sure that, hey, if at any point you made a promise, and this is where probably I differ than some people, but whether you say you're going to deliver it same day, next day, or in 3 days, that you do it,
Mm.
right? I think that is super important. Not to say that you deliver in 2 days and it takes four because you're using a different carrier, it missed a bunch of transits, etc. And I get that there's a lot of things out of your control, but your intention when you're building your network, I think that that's where these types of things come in. Like, what is that? What do I feel on the confidence of that reliability and that consistency of whatever? Because everyone will tell you they can do everything,
Yeah.
until all of a sudden the trucks are overloaded, right? So I think that that's there. The other type of thing is that I think you have to really keep in mind and blend the fact that, like, if you're a D2C brand especially, or if you're a limited footprint retailer, you have some stores, but not for the majority of your customers, is that physical interaction of a delivery or that fulfillment still becomes part of your brand experience. Like, people don't view it as, oh, that was just the delivery provider that messed up. Oh, that was just the warehouse that messed up or something like that. Like, they just view it as, I bought from retailer A and it's
Mm.
retailer A succeeded or failed, right? Because that transference of like, well, you picked your providers and you chose those methods to go out the door and you did this and that. Because I'd be willing to bet, and you can answer this for me from your own perspective, but
Sure.
regardless, if you see a offer for someone like an Uni, you see an On Track, you see a UPS, whatever you see at checkout, and whatever you may select for whatever reason, for the most part, I don't think any customer assumes that as they're making that transaction with a brand where they've decided to buy product and they decide then on their fulfillment channel or whatever, or method or whatever, they don't actually think that the brand is offering them garbage at any of them.
Mm.
They're just maybe offering them baseline plus better.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's an interesting point, because I think too, I mean, the consumer, right? I mean, obviously, like we know, right? Because we're in the business, right? But the average consumer, like, if they look at those shipping options, and there's different carriers to select from, probably majority of them are just like, they're just worried about, either one, the cost of the shipping, or two, like, is it going to get to me when I need it by, right? And I think that's probably the two things. They're not really, concerned about whether it's an On Track or UPS or whatever the case may be. That's what I would think.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, when you're talking about then experience and stuff like that, I think, working with carriers that invest the time to really understand like what they're delivering and for who. So for example, this part of Canada has gone through some massive heat waves over the last
Yeah,
six
yeah. It
weeks.
was hot
Like,
last
just
week in Toronto. Oh, yeah,
it was
when I was
hot,
there.
but like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So Something as simple as the fact of like, hey, if I'm coming up to a door and I'm going to drop something off, does that carrier try to instruct their people? Do they try to give them SOPs, like operating procedures, to be like, well, what do you do? Because like my house is an example. You come up, straight shot to the door, but you have these like two, let's call it pillars or whatever at the start. Now, they're not super big or anything like that, but if I'm dropping off a package, the amount of time it's really going to take me to drop it dead center versus like maybe tossing it a little bit behind one of those pillars that might be at least shaded when it's essentially 35 degrees Celsius or 40, almost feeling like 40 degrees Celsius, that can make a big difference, because that customer that then just bought something and then they open it up, like there's a lot of things that won't do well in that level of heat and
Yeah.
sunlight if they sit out there for hours at a time, right? People don't do well sitting out there for hours at a
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And same thing with like meal kits and stuff like that. Like, look, I get that it's packaged and I get this and I get that, but the reality is, like, it's food. So it's like, what can you do to make sure that that's going to be as successful experience and delivery for that customer as possible, which means, right time, right place, sort of right communication when it's delivered, all of these types of things. So, these are just small things. And same thing with warehouse providers, right? Like, how well do they handle the package? Is it getting bumped and grinded through their, handling processes and procedures? Like, I've been in some warehouses where the drop off some of their conveyors is probably more than most customers think about. You know what I mean? And for a lot of products, it may not matter, but for some, when they come in and they're maybe the first few packages going into that like Gaylord or whatever, it could matter. Like, you know what I mean? When you're talking about damages and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. And those little kind of nuances, like you mentioned, just putting the package behind a pillar versus just leaving it out in the open, I think do make an impact for the consumer, right? And they may not be conscious of something small like that, but when they open that box, like that product is gonna still have the integrity that it was designed to have, right? When they open it. So it definitely matters. So on the topic of kind of these final mile providers, right? And there's a lot of kind of startup ones or regional ones, right? And you talk a lot about them, and you talk a lot about how they can be viable for the long term, right? Or in some cases, I've seen you mentioned too how they won't be viable for the long term
Yeah.
as well, right? So
Yeah.
so from like a warehouse operator perspective, like I guess especially maybe 3PL perspective, who's doing fulfillment for these brands and it has these relationships with these carriers, how can they kind of navigate making sure that they're getting into relationships with these carriers that are going to have longevity, right? And are not going to be kind of fading out at some point, like we've seen some over the past couple of years, and then kind of get stuck a little bit.
For sure. So I'll step that back just a little bit, because the thing
Sure.
is that I think I think the better 3PLs have relationships with their carriers.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of 3PLs essentially just have a platform that where they can connect to different carriers. And I think that that's super fundamental, because to your point, a 3PL's world is typically one of two things, right? They either onboard customers, and as part of their service offer, they essentially do either a rate shop or they do the distribution of packages out to carriers, right? Or they essentially take on a customer's account number and they pass that through as part of the transaction, so that like, hey, like this customer goes with UPS, I use the UPS account number, blah, 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 whatever. So to your point, I think that's the first step that's needed, is that, if you want to be, in my opinion, a more successful 3PL in the sense of being a better partner to the brands and to the clients you work with, that needs to also then extend into partnerships with the carriers that you will use for your rate shop. Because the best thing, or the biggest advantage a 3PL has, and the offer they bring to the table, so to speak, when they're engaging with different carriers, is their volume. If I'm doing 10,000 packages a day, and 6,000 of those packages are essentially me pushing them through a rate shop platform or whatever it means, I have the opportunity with those 6,000 packages to try to create some density, to try to create some consistency, to try to create certain things for certain carriers, right? Now that can be hard because the reality is that, a 3PL has already got a lot to deal with inside the four walls of the building. So, in their mind, like, I don't want to then take on having to manage a carrier or being responsible for
Yeah.
that. But, I do think that very often, like, less is more is probably more of a winning approach. Like, I would rather have fewer carriers that I have better relationships with, that do a better job for me because I'm more important for them, than just being like, we connect to 35 carriers. Like, okay, great. Like, whatever. Like, you know what I mean? Because like then I have 5 packages going here, 10 going there, or whatever. You know what I mean? So I think that's probably the most important thing, is to know, and then to know obviously why you're partnering with these people, and like where their strengths are and where their weaknesses are. And I don't say weaknesses because I'm putting them down. Every network is going to have areas where they're not as strong. Like, there's very, very, very few organizations that essentially have built to the same level of strength and capability just everywhere. Like, because they build over time. So the likelihood of thinking that everyone is equal is just, sort of a fallacy.
Interesting. So you're kind of, I guess your advice is to not just rely on some kind of platform that's going to connect you to whoever, right? But kind of develop these relationships, and maybe it's not, the offering of 35 different carriers that you have, right? But maybe it's that you have a few relationships that are very solid, and you're able to kind of utilize that and help the carrier essentially then help you, right? And be able to create that density. I know that's a big thing that you talk about, the density, and that helps to make these last mile carriers more viable, right? And more cost effective as they do delivery. So I think that's really, really interesting advice there, definitely. So now let's talk a little bit about kind of what you think is just hype in logistics right now. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of different technology that's coming in, and I'm curious, what do you think is just hype right now, and it's not really feasible, effective, or will last the long term?
Well, so the first biggest, like the biggest thing I think is overhyped. I'm not saying it doesn't have benefit, but I think it's oversold. Is like sort of these, anyone spending a bunch of time trying to pretend that their delivery network is significantly better because of AI optimization, AI route optimization, or anything like that. Like, the reality is that, like, there's only so many routes and so much compute and everything that's going on, and you're still going to end up dealing with a driver, and you're still going to end up with things that change very rapidly in a moment, like someone getting into an accident, someone crossing the street when they shouldn't have, a red light switch. Like, I think that anyone that is overly emphasized on saying, hey, we have an AI routing and optimization platform, and that's why our delivery service is so good, this and that, is just not true, because it's not that much of a huge step up from what was already happening, like more or less mathematically. So I think that that's the first thing. And I kind of extend that a little bit to any type of optimization, because, if when you get into like doing network optimization, you're trying to decide these delivery routes in the first place, let alone the turn by turn directions. There are certain things that everybody ends up doing to essentially do the math faster, right? Like, and I'll use a really simple example, but it highlights the point. If I have a geography this big, and I have a customer way over here, and I have a customer way over here, regardless if you're doing any kind of traditional optimization, you're using AI optimization or anything like that, the system will never put those two customers, it will never explore a situation where these two customers are on the same route in the same sequence when you have all kinds of other stuff in between. Like, it's like, I'm sorry, I'm not taking your furthest point to the west and your furthest point to the east and thinking that it's in some magical, like, Valhalla of a world that these two things are going to somehow make sense to be done together. Like, those types of things just like don't happen. So, there's a lot of rules, and there's a lot of, like, let's call it like almost pre-processing that happens. So I think overselling on that, I think of course you can tweak out optimizations and you can pull a little bit. The caveat I say with that is that level of optimization, and that's where I lived a lot of my life, when you start benefiting from like 30 seconds at a time, or you start benefiting from 15-second wins, like on average, you have a very mature, very robust, and very dense network, because that's what it takes to essentially stack then all of those 15-second wins to actually make something meaningful out of it. You know what I mean? So I think that that's one big thing. The other thing that I think is too overhyped is more on then the insights, analytics, and like, let the bots kind of tell you all of your trends, tell you everything you need to know, because there's a big difference between being able to do the math and then being able to understand, like, what's happening and also connecting it to your business, right? And I'm quasi fearful of, like, what's the next 5 to 10 years going to be like when you have people using these tools that generate forecasts, or that give optimization solutions or whatever, but then couldn't explain to you why it's better, and let alone being able to fact check the bots or anything like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think those two things are like really oversold, and I think they play into people wanting to be able to obviously like lower costs, and it sounds super reasonable because people know that it's hard and a lot of people don't understand it. But I think that they're oversold for sure, at least today.
Interesting. So that last one, I mean, looking at like a forecast, right, or some type of data analytics. That's obviously, as you mentioned, I mean, that's something that's being talked about by everyone, right? Like AI optimization of this and AI optimization of that, and giving you the analytics you need, so you don't have to do the number crunching. But are you seeing where that in the long term is going to get a little more? I mean, I guess now, because you're saying that there's no way to kind of fact check that. I mean, are you seeing instances where it's not true, or like if you run manually side by side, that you're not getting the same results?
I think it depends on what you push through it. I think like essentially if you push files and data that is extremely well structured and everything like that, I think you're probably not going to find too many issues, especially the way they approach it now with sort of Python scripting and things like that. I think the challenge becomes when you run into messy data, and that's the reality of a lot of sort of operations, retail, logistics, all of these types of things, is that there's a lot of data from different systems. People use different names, they use different codes, they use whatever. And like, what do you do with something as simple as like an NA value? Like, I have a missing value. Is it missing because it should be missing? Is it missing because of the fact it'll always be missing for that type of product? Is it because of that carrier? Is it always missing for them? So it's like, and those types of things can like dramatically change results. Like if the boss just like, oh, I'm going to remove everything that doesn't have full data. It's like, okay, but if you remove them from one step, you might find that you need it in another step or something like that. So I think the challenge is that right now a lot of what's touted with AI is being touted by people who really understand data, they understand the business, they understand analytics, and I think that I just think it's a misnomer to think that like, okay, well, how strong is the tool if you never had that background? So I think that the real value is continuing to train people to understand the data, to ask the right kind of questions, to put it in the right kind of business context, and have the right type of business acumen. And sure, helping them then maybe do less of the grunt work, so to speak, I think is a benefit. But the concept of an easy button, I think, is super dangerous for a lot of businesses, for their own performance and sort of stability.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think it's the easy button is attractive, right? But it is
For sure.
a little a little dangerous, as you said, right? I mean, like, how do we know exactly, like, is the right output there? And I think you have a great point about, is that data messy? That's behind that, right? And then you're not going to get the right outputs that you're looking for. So very interesting there. So
Well,
sure.
And sorry, just like a really quick example for people. Like I use some of these tools obviously to help make things fast or whatever. I was trying to do something super simple just with some like graphing, like programmatic graphing in R, and both things like ChatGPT and Gemini and stuff got stuck on this very particular part of the problem. And even going back and forth between both of them, they were suggesting solution after solution after solution after solution that just like essentially didn't work and wasn't making any difference. And they were always presenting it with like the assuredness and this is the definitive fix and here's why and blah, 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 whatever. In the end, I fixed it myself, and it really just became a fact of that the way that the code was generated. And this is where, you even think about some of this vibe coding stuff. And if you heard this T app or whatever, it's funny, but like this vibe coding is that like the answer, like, or the approach that it took is valid and is true and very often works, but it did not work in that very specific circumstance, and it couldn't get out of its loop of like, this is valid. It's like, yeah, it's valid like 9 out of 10 times. This is actually the 1 out of 10 that approach or that syntax and the way that you do it actually doesn't work. And they really struggled to get out of that kind of loop. And I just, think of how dangerous that can be for business when they prioritize, these platforms prioritize results because no one wants to pay for any type of service and just have it bomb out and say error, couldn't do it, this and that. Prioritize results and giving answers where they might shortcut the way that those answers come out.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting to see like just kind of how all this develops, right? And the evolution of it. It's so fast how it's developing. And I think there's like continually increasing accessibility to the tools, right? For people, but there is also like that, like people just gonna rely on that, and it's not going to be the right thing, and then they're going to end up in a bad spot. So very interesting there. So now we talked a little bit about what's overhyped to you, but what's some technology or something that you've seen in the past couple of months that's really like has you excited in the operations world?
I do think that a lot of these orchestration or like workflow type things are probably what I find the most interesting, right? Like there's all kinds of, I don't like to name names just because of the fact that I'm not affiliated with some of them that way, like other people are or whatever, and dropping them. But I think that, that is really an important part of the future, being able to help people understand like, hey, how can I transact data and how can I take these repeated tasks and really like automate them, connect to different systems, like move information around in a way that takes a lot less time and effort, but more importantly, dramatically increases the reliability, right? And kind of turning a lot of the day-to-day into a structured process that isn't wholly dependent on like just Bob and Bob being the best. Like, you know what I mean? I think that is really cool. And I think that that's probably one of the biggest like unlocks, because so many businesses, especially smaller businesses, succeed on the skill sets or talent level of the people, which obviously is good in some ways, but it can also, dramatically impact your growth or even set you back if like, people leave organizations or they move on to something else or they want something else for their career. And, this coming a little bit back from my more corporate days, if you also want to have great people working for you and you want to do well, you then can't be biased and say, well, I've got this amazing resource in this role in my warehouse, and like I can never make them a site manager because I need them to be the operations supervisor because no one does it as well as they do. Because the reality is they may not want to just be an operations supervisor for life or something like that, right? Despite how good they are. Some do for sure, but not everyone. So I think it's that balance of like, how do you make sure that you can, keep and retain the best people and give them the tools. So I think that those types of automation orchestration platforms are by far the most impressive. And then I think that the other thing that is growing rapidly is using a lot of this like LLM technology, these chatbot type technologies, but with your own data, like really supplemented by your own data, so that you can ensure that all people within an organization would get sort of similar answers or quickly have access to the same type of SOPs and datas and reasons why. Because I find that in a lot of, sort of businesses, one of the things that holds people back is that people get shy or embarrassed to ask too many questions, right? Or they don't want to keep asking questions because of the fact that like, they're worried they might seem incompetent or something like that. So if now all of a sudden you have these tools that have like, a bunch of your SOPs, a bunch of your data, a bunch of your approaches, a bunch of how you handle these problems as you continue to go through your day-to-day and your business evolution, I think it's really empowering then to make sure that information is easily accessible and gets back into your business. I think Walmart's been like a really great example of just showing their employees like what they can do with AI and how they can continue to make sure that they upskill or empower more people a lot faster and a lot more consistently. So I think that's those are probably two of the things that I think are the most interesting short term, not necessarily the sexiest, that's for sure. But as an operator, I do value the things that have like real world day-to-day impact.
Yeah.
Because those are the things that live in people's mind or that keep them distracted or that keep them held back or not achieving like the highest potential that either they can or the business can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a good point you had in there about the secretly kind of in the back of your head, like keeping that person that has that great skill set, like in a position, like not wanting to move them up or move them out to another location or something like that, just because you don't want to lose that, right? But there's tools now that can allow you to kind of capture that and be able to leverage that a little more and help them evolve still, which is the right thing to do, I would say. But really, really interesting to talk to you here, John, as always, and happy we could record it this time, this conversation. So very good sure. to share out there, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing these insights and thoughts with us. If people want to connect with you on LinkedIn or they want to sign up for your newsletter, which is like I will say is probably like one of the most comprehensive deep dives, which I think is the name, right? Deeper dives.
It is, yeah, deeper dive.
Yeah, out there is really, really insightful and a lot of knowledge packed into one newsletter. How can people do that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can find me on LinkedIn. So John McClymont, I'm usually coming up first these days because of the posts and stuff like that. Or it's operationalinnovations.ca. So I am Canadian, but obviously working in the US, UK, Canada and stuff like that. So easiest way to get me there, and then direct email john@operationalinnovations.ca.
All right, fantastic. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well as in the show notes too. So, John, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
Awesome. Thanks.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesaresexy.com and get your own.